Some of you guys might know me, some of you don't. Some of you might have gotten an email from me if you are part of the user experience group on LinkedIn. I'm that guy that kind of likes to send those nasty ones out of not posting weird job offers like C# that don't fit within the group. But my name is Tony Moura. I'm a 15-year senior user experience architect. Big projects, small projects, startups. A couple of months ago, I actually did an interview for Angel, the company that just spoke. Ironically enough is that the CEO came to me and he asked me a question. How do people consume content? And I thought that was kind of an interesting question because it hadn't been really posed. Honestly, I hadn't thought of it before. But what's interesting is that from a cognitive science standpoint, a lot of people don't take the human machine into account. So when you have to ask yourself from a mobile or a standard user experience standpoint, are we really building a better way for the human to interact with what we're building or designing? Or are we really designing for the machine itself? You wouldn't take a high-performance car and put in diesel. It just wouldn't work right. So you wouldn't ask the car to drink diesel. You're going to put in what it absolutely needs to run its optimal performance. So I started thinking about that, and he says, I want to know how we consume data with our eyes. Because if Angel, it's visually, it's audible. How do we consume data with our ears? So I started doing the research, and how many people know that our eyes combined, if you can turn it into a DSLR camera, would be 576 megapixels? That's a huge amount of data. We transfer data to our head, though, through our brain, and our optical nerve is actually a small extension of our brain at 10 megabits per second. Now, how does that work in everyday life when you're designing or thinking about an application? What it means fundamentally is that an average adult reads 250 words per minute. You can only feed so much to the machine because it'll only have a 60% cognitive retention rate of what the person's reading. So if somebody comes up to you and says, we want to put 5,000 words on this page at 12-point font size, that's not really a wise idea. So I started taking this more into account and said, how can we do that? And it comes back to the old adage, less is more. A lot of companies that I go into that I consult for is they have a lot of features, a lot of feature sets. We want to put a lot of this, we want to put a lot of that. It really doesn't add any additional value. And what it does is actually drops the perception of the value of the application that you're delivering, overall of the brand of the company. It impacts all the way around. So in doing so is that when you go from there is you put less is more. And my speech isn't hugely long and I like to open up to questions. Is that when you do less, the person reads slower. The retention rate increases. The font size and stuff like that's differently. It inherently impacts the overall user experience of what you're trying to deliver. But adding more or feature sets don't add to the experience. They detract. The other thing is that a lot of people I'm seeing of applications that are designed by startups or newer companies is they're actually trying to put more on the screen, but they're trying to go in a vertical manner. Don't forget is that the iPhone, and when it's in landscape, or excuse me, portrait mode, you do have, in a sense, virtual screens that are off to the right and left-hand side. Psychologically, those are smaller chunks of information that a person can digest that when they're swiping right or left, they start to understand and compartmentalize versus feeling that it's a large, big chunk of massive data that you're having to scroll through. How many people have seen in almost every website now how you have those image sliders that are at the top? How many people like them? One person, he's like, well, have you guys ever done any heat map studies on those? Anybody? Anybody done any click-throughs, heat map studies on any of those image sliders?
Like desktop.
Only on desktop. It's kind of ironic now because you can cringe. I know Steve will cringe because they now work on mobile devices, right? So he's already shaking his head going, After about, honestly, the third main image of those, it drops off substantially. The reason being is people don't want to go through it anymore. They don't want to wait. It's give me the content. Is there any, in my presentation, like I said, it's really, really simple, is I want you to do less with more and think about how the machine that's holding your potential application or who you're designing for is consuming what you're putting in front of them. Are we putting too much and really does it make sense? You have to know who you're designing for, not just the person or the persona or it's a soccer mom, but how that soccer mom is going to absorb the information that you're putting in front of them. Does anybody have any questions whatsoever?
Well, you said averages. So, but you need to account for your audience in terms of like some types of audiences may be able to absorb more?
They could, yes, but on the average, if you kind of take those highs and those lows and you put it kind of right in the middle and you kind of throw out the deltas, the average is exactly going to be kind of around 250 words per minute.
So saying we should forget about whether it's a soccer mom, just that we know that.
No, I mean well, no, I mean the soccer mom can absorb it, but then so can, let's say, a guy with a PhD, right? So it's right in the middle. It's where you're not kind of excluding one or excluding the other.
Right. What I'm saying is that you don't need to have all this.
Well, you still have the persona, so you still understand who you're identifying for, so then who you're designing for, because then that's going to run into your visual design, your information architecture, the structure. So that still takes into account based on those personas. Sure.
Is there anything out there in terms of how some of those data rates deteriorate under situational impairment? So say someone's driving, trying to multitask, watching TV while they're surfing the app. I mean,
All while they're driving? They rock. They're surfing the web, they're watching TV, they're feeding the kid in the back seat.
Well, no, I've just noticed that a lot of times people are consuming more than one data stream at a time, or they're interacting with more than one interface at a time. So if someone's watching TV and then trying to browse your app through an iPad or through a phone.
Right, like sitting on the couch, kind of doing the same time.
I mean, they could be doing it while they're driving.
There hasn't been any official studies that have done, and that's something that when this question was posed to me, I actually want to play with to figure out kind of what that is. What I'm actually trying to do is actually put a formula together, and I actually spoke to Stephen about is trying to put a formula together of how you would put that together, of saying this is what we know the machine kind of will do, but when you start to break those tasks up, here's where you're kind of losing off.
Since you keep pointing at me, I actually, there's an article I did on UX Matters a couple of weeks ago about being distracted and stuff. It's about augmented reality and stuff like that. But it has some reference to this article to research about that. Basically, people don't multitask, they switch. And if they switch too much, they start shedding tasks. They do a bad job at some of them.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're ambidextrous, I've never seen it. I saw a show the other night where the guy, because he was having seizures, they separated his brain into two halves, and he could independently think of two things at exactly the same time. That's the only guy I've ever heard that can multitask. You want to go through the surgery? Feel free.
One of the other presenters talked about how on digital you tend to do things in narrow slices and switch constantly changing what you're doing, and that's going to impact the uptake you can have on any given task.
It does. Because, well, more so it's from a psychological standpoint, right? So because psychologically you're stopping your task, you're starting it, you're stopping it, you're starting it. It's just like driving in traffic with a stick, which I do every day.
The other thing is that on mobile you're more likely to be distracted. You're in line waiting for something or out looking up something.
Right.
Whereas at home on a computer, on a desktop machine, you're probably dedicated.
It's true. I found I play poker the best when I'm actually in the restroom. I'm not distracted from any outside influences. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about how this changes over time? So when somebody habituates to a UI, can you take them down an engagement funnel and present them more?
Yeah, UX, I like to say UX has a long tail. UX doesn't fall off. And what a lot of companies are starting to understand now is I'm working with a company here in town called Canvas. And Canvas is really cool that when I came in, I was like, wow, they're going to have me come in for 3 or 4 months, tell them where they need to get to, and then, okay, that'll be done. And Canvas said, and I told them, I said, look, UX has a long tail because the reason being is when your first users adopt to where they're at and where they're going, they start to understand it. So the cognitive rate actually does go up. It increases because you already know what to expect. You've set the expectations. So then you can add a little bit more over the long tail, but still not drop off those first people. So you can add a little bit more once a user does start to get where things are. It's kind of interesting because Facebook, for a while, had things a certain way, and I think they literally changed the UI in 3 times in a day, and I was laughing my head off because it was, the chat was on the right, then it was at the bottom, then it was back at the right every time I refreshed it. And I was like, you just can't do that to people because you're totally screwing them up. Yes?
I didn't understand your read statistic. Is that people who are reading from books? Is that people who graduated high school? Because we know that 53% of the people are failing high school. If we look at the average of the readers who the education department says can read, it doesn't seem to match that. So I don't know.
It's not based on any, in a sense, like high school or based on, say, reading a book. It's if you were to put a single page of documentation in front of somebody and ask them to read it over.
A person off the street?
Typically, yes, over a series group of people. And basically saying is, here's, how do you read this? Timing them and then, okay, what was your retention rate of actually what you read?
And what, it's wild for me because I don't understand the level of the reading material. I don't understand the level of the population you're dealing with.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of, there's a lot of data that.
We put that in context phone and look at 28% of the people who use the mobile phone also have no internet access. These are largely people who are at the bottom end of the economic scale who don't necessarily read well. It's mind-boggling how you find this.
Yeah, I mean, well, the statistics are generally available that are online. I mean, I didn't write them, I found them. So I would have to do more research in the statistics. I will, yes. I mean, if you follow me up, actually, follow me either on Twitter or email me, which I'll give to you here. That way you can get a hold of me, and I'll be more than happy to give you all the sources I got the information from. Yes?
You talked about observing and retaining textual data. What about visual data and visualization strategy, presentation of graphical or
That's actually good, because the reason being is it actually sticks better in somebody's head.
right.
So when you did, that's just literally taken off of just kind of just straight text, right? But when you start to play around with the fonts and the font style and the text and make it actually more visual, the retention rate actually increases. Because somebody now understands it better. You're telling more of the story. So not only are they retentioning it that way, but cognitively, it's part of a greater whole. Anybody else? Yes?
When you talk about flat navigation or stateless presentation, how do you make a clean presentation when you don't have state, when you're trying to make a flat navigation and something comes code without having established a state or interest?
Well, it's kind of interesting because right now I'm actually the head of user experience for PBS Interactive. I've been there for about a month. And PBS was so focused on the frame that held the content, everything that was around it. But when you looked at the heat maps, everything was focused on where the images were and the videos, which was the lower left-hand side of the page. And I went, why are you doing it that way? Well, we got to have this taxonomies, there's navigation, silos of buckets and content. And I said, oh, let's get rid of it. And they went, whoa, wait a minute. 30 years we've been doing it this way. 12 years for this current incarnation of the website, and they feel it's brand new. And I said, let's just get rid of it. In a matter of a day, I re-architected pbs.org so that it actually looks like Pinterest, so that it's now a fire hose of content. I'm calling it PBS Universe. It was adopted within the first couple of days that I was there. It was given sign off by the president of the division, and we're working on at least a prototype of the code now. So that doesn't have the kind of any state to it whatsoever. So it's literally you kind of land there, and here's all of your massive content that PBS delivers, right? So it's going to work for us. It's a different dichotomy because you have the stations that are producing and consuming content. You have users that are consuming content, whether it's video or you have specific guys like Nova or .nabi or these kind of big, massive $30 million productions. So what I wanted to do is say, let's get rid of the taxonomies. Let's get rid of the buckets. We'll let you filter content. You want to see just videos, it repaints the page, pulls from the server, and then repaints everything so it's only videos or a series of videos. So we're filtering content, but we're giving you everything as a whole versus traditionally where you're giving everybody kind of, here's what you're seeing, and we'll let you pick the buckets you want to go into. I'm going to give you the whole bucket, and I'm just going to let you pick out of it what you want. So it's basically one state. Yes?
How do you take something like 15 different items and not take the Microsoft approach where you drill down and try to convey that in a simple, intuitive fashion?
I let the content tell the story. So kind of with that same thing I was just talking about is that the content, if you have very rich content, it works pretty well. If you had white papers and it was just nothing but white papers and you had 40 of them, I wouldn't suggest putting that on the page unless you did something graphically that treated it really, really well. But it works not in all locations. So for that one, based on the content is what's driving the buckets that are going to contain it within. What we did is in the bottom of one of these tiles is we put tags. The tags are actually navigational links. So if it's, say, .nabi and you're watching a 1-minute video clip, you can click on video series and then it'll repaint the entire page. It goes back to the server, pulls all the rest of the content or .nabi, and then fills in all the rest of the holes, pulls the rest of the content away. Yes?
What is it? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, go off.
Okay. Yeah, just ask me on the way out.